Cool. We're going to start all the drama right there, right away. That was Vesti la Giubba from the end of Act 1 of Pagliacci. Vesti la Giubba, what it means is put on the costume. And so what's going on, raise your hand if you've heard that aria at all in any context, commercials.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so this is a show within a show about a Commedia dell'arte troupe. And so this character, Canio, plays the clown in the show. And so he's saying, I have to put on the costume even though I know my wife is cheating on me, XYZ. And then when he gets there, ridi Pagliaccio, sul tuo amore, he's literally saying, laugh, clown. You have to make them laugh even though your heart is breaking. And so you don't get much more melodramatic than Pagliacci in general. Talk a little bit about Leoncavallo, that is who wrote Pagliacci. And really outside, he has about 3 pieces that we kind of remember in the canon a little bit. It's Pagliacci, which is a regular, and then there's Zaza, and then he wrote his own version of Bohème. He was actually writing Bohème before Puccini did, but Puccini beat him with the premiere, and Puccini wrote better. So his Bohème is kind of in kind of this, oh, it's kind of a nice thing to look back on. But the big thing about Cavallo, and why I don't think he's as remembered as much, he's actually one of the few of the Italian, like this new school. It's kind of, Verdi was this big giant, and then we have all of these kind of, Puccini's up there with Verdi. I can't say that he's not, but it was like they're considered like the new school of Italian that was taking opera out of late Romantic into the 20th century, and they crossed the century mark right there. But where Cavallo is unlike his contemporaries of Cilea, Mascagni, is that Leoncavallo also was a librettist. And so he wrote the words to all of his things. And I'm wondering if that got in his way, that he was so good with words that, like, what's hard about opera is you got to fit a lot of music in there too. And so some of the greatest plays I've seen, like even the Shakespeare plays by Verdi, he chopped the crap out of them. So that, because a lot of the drama is not with words, it's part of it, but the music is part of that drama. And so, but he really did find his footing with Pagliacci. It's kind of that beautiful combination of comedy meets drama meets kind of intrigue, and all of it is at once. Cavallo was born in Naples, and he studied at the conservatory. And I kept trying to look up soap opera stories. Maybe Maggie knows the soap opera story of Leoncavallo, but it was kind of vague. It kind of like he would play cafes and he traveled the world and learned some stuff.
He was pretty straightforward. He was a pretty regular guy. I mean, there's so much dirt on musicians and performers and composers that there's always fun stories. But I agree, John. I was looking and he's just like.
The only thing I could kind of is, I don't know that him and Puccini got along all that great. It was kind of that rivalry, and I don't think Bohème helped it at all. But I did read something that, Puccini begrudgingly, I don't know if begrudgingly, but he did show up to Cavallo's funeral, Leoncavallo's funeral. Excuse me if I just call him Cavallo. That's always my brain is like Leon's his first name, but no. So because of that, I want to dive kind of more into the opera today, if you guys are cool with that. So Pagliacci is in 1892 is kind of where we're at. And Pagliacci is Leoncavallo's kind of reaction to Mascagne's Cavaliere Rusticana. And so he's kind of like, he saw this Verismo over the top show, and he's like, I have to write something. And so he wrote Pagliacci. Um, and it's kind of fitting that kind of when you see him today, that's kind of the pairing that you see. It'll be like Act 1 is Cavaliere Rusticana, and then Act 2 would be Pagliacci, because both are about an hour 15. And so they make a beautiful night of theater together, and you get this very, very Italian Verismo. And while we're talking about Verismo, I've been doing some studying for the opera stuff that we're going to be doing in a few weeks. And Tosca is kind of considered Puccini's Verismo, like one of his most Verismo operas. And the play Tosca, out of this 19th century, because like kind of art forms kind of follow each other in a way. Like usually it's kind of the literary masters, they're followed by maybe the musicians that are followed by the artists, like the visual artists. And there's always this kind of who comes up with the new concept first, and there's this tug of war that goes on. But Tosca, for instance, was in this play, was considered what is called a well-made play. Well, it sounds very pretentious. What it really means is that stylistically, that the show has a tempo, that you're never like you're going to let them laugh. You're going to time it out that they're going to laugh at this time, and then they're going to feel this and that it keeps crescendoing up into a climatic ending, and then end of show. And so I feel like Pagliacci, even though I didn't read like that as part of this well-made play, it's part of that. Because once you see Pagliacci, it kind of has that same thing. It's kind of like, oh, this is fun. We're having a good time. And then as it goes, you keep getting pulled into this tornado that finally hits you over the head in Act 2.
So I'm going to interject here. I just want to back up because there's some really cool alignment between this show and some of the ones we've spoken about previously. So for those of you who were on when we talked about Puccini and Verismo originally, I think we brought that up with Puccini. Yes, okay. So when we talk about the Verismo style, it's really like life writ large. So it's got a dark quality to it. It's got big emotions. It's a lot of anguish. And this was a short-lived, really impactful style. It's held up really well over the years, even though it was only made popular by a small number of composers. And a lot of what John's describing with how it pulls you into and through the story is part of that. So these shows don't cut up easily. They're not like Mozart pieces where you have your set aria and everything stops, and then there's a really nice cadence at the end that tells you it's over and everyone claps, and then the next piece starts. It has more of a tumbling through the story feel to it, and that's in the music too. So there's eras during which language is a more critical piece of opera, and parts of it where the music really takes over. I think in Verismo we have a really nice balance between the two. Frankly, there are some operas where I don't even think you need super titles. The words just don't matter. It's all about the music. And this is an age-old dilemma. So they talk about, we say in Italian, prima la parola, prima la musica. Which one comes first, the words or the music? Every composer has their own take on that, and every style has their own take on that. But this sits right in the middle. So that overarching story is really important, even though the specific moments of dialogue aren't necessarily, except for really critical moments. And I would take you back to that opening, laugh clown. Just think about those two little words carry so much weight and anguish and drama in them, and they didn't need more than that. So that's a big part of it. And then I want to take it one step further and talk about, before John gets into plot, which I think he's going to next, talking about how we have a story within a story. And that's, again, a model that is used by different composers throughout the eras, and they all position it a little bit differently, but we just talked about Ariadne having a story within a story. So that depth of portraying the people, portraying the story, it really gives them an opportunity to reflect on that whole group of people who create art. And if you think about how buttoned up some of these historical eras were, artists really were the people living on the edge. They were living the big dramatic lives. They were taking risks. And frankly, in many eras, they were viewed as a somewhat lesser than class. While you might applaud someone frantically on stage and follow their career and be honored to have a fancy dinner with them, you weren't exactly seeking out opera singers and composers in your upper echelon white glove society. They were definitely the flavorers, and they were appreciated for the entertainment that they brought and the quality of their creative muster. But at the same time, they lived on the fringes in some ways. And if you went into the theater, in many ways, you were giving up your opportunity to live that higher echelon life forever. I don't care who you were born to or how much money you originally had. You would usually be thrown out of your family. You were an embarrassment. So I think one of the reasons that construct really came into play is it allowed composers to tell stories that had some drama to them, that had a little bit more shock factor than what you could really come up with when telling a story about some of the more genteel people who may have been sitting in the house. So I just wanted to bring those two pieces to your attention as we walk through the rest of this. But in a broader scale, think about not only who was on stage in both layers of those stories, but also who was watching them. And this really was racy. I mean, in some ways, these shows were the equivalent of the, and I'm totally blanking on the word right now, but like the really trashy magazines at the checkout line, right? Where everything goes just, you can't even believe the scope and horror of some of the stories, and not quite National Enquirer level, but you know, it's like the trashy feeding of your emotional, you know, popcorn eating, watching someone's life fall apart aspect. So as we dive into this, just keep that in mind is what's happening around the show. So John, dive in.
Well, I also want to talk a little bit. I feel like most of the Verismo I know also has this characteristics of very large voices,
Yes.
very large orchestrations, and very large sweeping lines. So I'm going to give us another clip. This is the duet between Neda and Silvio. I'm kind of halfway through it, and as Maggie's mentioned, there's no really good drop the needle point usually anywhere. And this is an over 10-minute duet. So I'm gonna give you kind of that big moment of, or part of a big moment, say that. So mind you, that's only 5 minutes into it. So it's kind of this, like, we pull you and we get like big and like it gets overly dramatic and then it pulls away. And that's kind of the whole Verismo. You're on this ride of like, okay, you're all amped up, and then they bring you back, and then they amp you up some more. And then by the end of it, you're just kind of like almost, as an audience member, even kind of tired because they have this sense that you know something foreboding is about to happen. It can't, if it was just kind of like, okay, they're singing about this and they're going to get away and it's going to be lovely, you're like, but you know that's not going to happen. It's kind of like the tabloid story that you know kind of the ending before the ending even happens. I do want to get a little bit into the plot. And so part of Pagliacci, and excuse me, I'm going to get a cheat sheet, where I think I would get confused as an audience member is there's so many characters, yet there really isn't, because of the play within a play. There is Canio, who is the head of the troupe, and he kind of runs everything. And then within the show, he plays Pagliaccio, the main clown, and generally the clown gets walked all over in this commedia dell'arte kind of troupe that goes on. Neda is Canio's wife, and she plays Columbina in this story. And so that's also Pagliacci's wife, which is actually very common of the Commedia dell'arte, is that the two people that were like husband and wife on stage were also husband and wife off stage. They found that it kind of created a better connection and more believability. Um, However, in the play, she's in love with the Harlequin character, who is played by Beppe. In real life, she's in love with Silvio, who's not in the play. So it's just kind of having all of these characters all together. And then there's another character named Tonio, who plays Taddeo, and he's kind of Columbina's servant and kind of a fool in general. And he's in love, Tonio, the real guy, not the person in the play, is in love with Neda. And he expresses his love. Well, I'm ahead of myself. So the troupe has come into a town, and all the characters they've set up for the show that's going to be later that day, and they kind of go out to a bar, but Neda stays behind. Antonio stays behind also, because Tonio wants to express his love to Neda. And Neda kind of laughs him off. And Tonio, in that very foreboding baritone sort of way, says, "You're going to pay for this." And he goes, because he knows Canio kind of has a temper. And so he goes and kind of hides away. And Silvio comes in, and that was the duet that we just saw, and expresses his love to Neda. And Neda is in love with Silvio, but she knows that Canio ain't all there in the head. Like when his temper goes, bad things can happen. And so she's tried to cut it off and say, no, we can't do this. And then, but she can't, is overcome, and they're like, okay, we're going to elope. We're just going to leave and we're going to do our thing. Well, this is overheard, not seen who, by Tonio, who goes back and lets Canio know. And so Canio's like, he's already had suspicion that his wife's cheating, and now is all amped up. And this is where we kind of end Act 1, is him like putting on the costume. He's kind of had a fight here and there. I know I'm missing some stuff in there, but he's like, okay, I got to do this show. And so he's putting on the costume. End of Act 1. So Act 2 opens up with us watching the play within the play. And the play within the play is a traditional Commedia dell'arte. And what I can tell you about the Commedia dell'arte is that it started in around 1551 is what I think I just saw. Don't fact check me. But these kind of plays with like the fool and the servant, and they were all very stock characters. So like the good guy was very good guy, the fool was very foolish, the beautiful maiden was very beautiful, and everybody kind of fit a category. And
we talked about this before with a couple of different operas. For those of you who've come to a few of these, this style of writing was really popular for a while and then kind of died off, except in opera. And one of the shortcuts that we use in telling these complex, rich stories with fewer words is by basing everything on stereotypes like this. So there is a real ease of slipping into a story when you can see right away, oh, that's the perky young love interest. Okay. Oh, that's the angry old dad guy. Yeah, I know who he is. Oh, there's that really handsome young man. I bet he goes with that cute little girl. So there's some real facility to just looking at who's on stage and understanding immediately. Because of course, back in the day, they didn't have super titles, right? So we have this great cheat sheet now for those of us who can see them well enough to follow along with the text and the dialogue. But back in the day, they did not have those. And frankly, very few people were focusing intensely on what was on stage. They were dipping in and out of the show. They were checking out who was in the theater. So this was a way for composers to really grab people right away. And if they missed something because they were whispering about somebody across the room, they could pop right back in and catch up with where everything was, if that makes sense. So this commedia dell'arte, that term, you're going to hear all the talk in Operaland. And even though it came from a theater stock, it really lives on in this art form. And it is so clear, and it is such a huge part of, I'm going to say, probably 3/4 or more of the operas that we consider standards. Yes, Richard just said, The Stereotypes also has a traditional costume to distinguish them to the audience. That is true. I don't know that our audiences today are aware of those, but you could go to an entire college course on just Commedia dell'arte, where those came from, how the stereotypes fit in, why they have found such longevity here, and exactly what those original looks were. So this was not only something that you could understand based on real life, but also visually incredibly impactful from the minute they stepped on stage. John, I jumped all over your storytelling.
It's okay.
Go back in.
I also want to interject, and this is just my wonder, like the reason I think it survived as long as it did is that we think of Italy as one big country right now. But for most of time, that wasn't the case. It's not really until into the 20th century that it's conglomerated and become its own one country thinking one thing. But you had Italians speaking probably 13 different versions of Italian. And so this was a way for a traveling troupe to be able to tell their story. And even if the audience didn't understand every word, even though it was technically the same language, that thank you, 1871, but 15 is when it became a country. But when it, but beforehand, so these dialects, and it'd be similar to here. Like there's slang that you might hear in the South that you might not understand because you're from Wisconsin, and vice versa. And so this helped kind of facilitate that. So as we get into Act 2 of the Pagliacci, Canio is amped up. And so the show is taking on, and Canio is kind of ad-libbing and trying to force Neda and her character to reveal the name of her lover, and she won't do it. And as she's doing it, the audience is actually getting revved up too, because they're like, oh my God, I've never seen this show before. This, like, you know, they might have saw it down the road like a week ago, but this is the brand new version of it, because he's ad-libbing all over the place and he's becoming more and more distraught and pushing. And finally she says she won't do it, and the comedy ends with he stabs Neda on stage in front of the whole audience, and then her lover Silvio comes up to try to save her, and he stabs her too. And then he looks at the audience, and I'll talk to you a little bit about debate on how it's supposed to end, but the last line of the show is La commedia è finita. The comedy is over, and or is ended. And
an understatement.
Yeah. And so there's debate, like most times in kind of modern, and maybe they're going back to a revisionist version of it, is that Canio, the clown that kills everybody, finishes it with a line and kind of does a mic drop. They say originally, actually, because the prologue starts with Tonio, and he's talking about how clowns and all this have a heart and it's kind of a play within a play within a play, if you think of it that way. Because he's addressing us as an audience as this is what you're about to see, and then we see the play, and then we see the play within that play. And then he was supposedly had the last line, because he's like, that's kind of finishing like with the postlogue that is like, see, this is why you don't mess with clowns. And also, if you see a crying clown, run away. It's bad news.
Okay, so I'm watching our time. We're at 5:28. You can see why we get so excited about this, but I encourage you, I know the quality of the audio tracks is really hard over Zoom. Take a few minutes after this call and go listen to just one or two pieces. There's a great soprano aria in this too, where Neda is just loving being outside. It is like the summer song from this show. It's before all the drama, and she's listening to the birds and she's chasing them and envying their freedom, and it's gorgeous. So check out Pavarotti when he's not through Zoom. Check out this beautiful aria in the middle. If you want to know more, go to Quarantine Opera. We've got some more fun stuff for you there. But in the meantime, we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
I'm going to share while you get your questions together. In super opera nerd way, I have Caruso's caricature books. This is his Pagliacci page. And Caruso was one of the best Pagliaccis that has existed. And his recordings exist online. And he simultaneously kind of lived Pagliacci's life in real life. His wife was kind of stepping out on him, and he said the hardest thing was that he was doing this role in real life as well as on stage.
For the play within a play within the play.
Within a play.
I'd like to add something here. Richard, who is on our Zoom call, I'm so glad that you joined us today. He's got something, he had emailed me a few weeks ago, something about this play. And Richard, would you care to share that story?
I'm not sure which one I wrote you, but the first time I saw Cav Pag was with the Florentine, and it was the night that JFK was killed. So it was either 1962 or 63, I forget which. And John Anello was the director of the company and the conductor. And it was my first time going to an opera. I had been waiting for this for months and months and months. And I was, with all due respect to the president, I was terrified they would cancel the opera that night, but they didn't. And so when it was about to start, Mr. Anello came out on the stage of Pabst Theater in those days, and he dedicated the church music in Cavalleria Rusticana to the late president.
Wow.
I still have the program for that performance over there in one of my boxes.
That is an incredible story. I'm still processing all the parts of that.
And it was a great performance. It was a great
Wow.
performance. I believe it was Andrea House. And I would have to check to see if it was Raquel Montalvo in the other female role. But it was a firebrand performance. It just riveting.
Thank you for sharing that, Richard. That's incredible. I have to say, one of my favorite parts of my job is getting to hear stories like that from our audience, although I think that one might take the cake. That's pretty out there. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have anything you want to share or ask while you have us until we meet again? Catherine.
Oh, hold on.
Oh, hang on.
Oh, I'm trying to unmute her. Hold on.
Okay, now on you. All right. Not to, it's not a good follow-up to Richard's story, but I really enjoy watching John make those drinks at the on the website. Is he really a bartender in disguise or something? It's like
If he is, he's been hiding it really well. I had yeah, we are wasting his talents.
Yeah. I mean, he enjoys it so much. He just loves making those drinks. But I've been watching all the different performances online, and Pavarotti is so powerful. And then there was Mario Lanza, who was a bit later as a tenor, and but the arias and the performances are so strong. It's just a wonderful show.
I cannot agree more. I have to say that the type of voices that are called for in this repertoire are the ones that thrill you to your toes. And it's a lot of power, and it's a lot of raw emotion. And I personally think Verismo shows are really good first operas for people because they do move so quickly. Many of them are shorter, and you get so much sound out of the orchestra and out of the singers that you like feel it in your body when you're sitting in the house. So thank you for that, Catherine. I agree. If you've never been to one in real life, definitely look for some Verismo. Puccini in particular, I will say, is a pretty perfect way to begin. And yeah, I'm just delighted you were all here. I love that you guys have shared a little bit and had some stories for us. That's wonderful. With that, I think we should hand it over to Christine for our wrap up.
I think Barbara has a question quick.
Oh, sorry, I can't see her.
She needs to unmute.
the caricature book you spoke of. You said it was Caruso's?
Yeah, Caruso had 473 illustrations he did.
Oh, so he drew as well?
Yeah, he drew all different kinds of opera, and then he'd have like composers.
Oh,
Yeah,
for
it's a really
goodness
dorky book I have.
That's
I just think
amazing.
it's unfair he was so multi-talented.
Right, that's amazing.
Yeah, Caruso's one of the greatest tenors who ever lived, and he also had a huge personality. In fact, I know we were going to talk about him a little bit. Let's add him into another show, because his life off of the stage was remarkable and in some ways ridiculously over the top. There are so many stories that float around about him. One of my favorites is that, and I'm going to try to say this elegantly, it's a pretty crass story. He loved the ladies, and they would put a bodyguard on his hotel room at night so that he couldn't waste his energy the nights before shows, because he never wanted to go to sleep. And all opera singers need a good night's sleep and lots of energy before a show. So they would lock him in and make sure he was doing everything possible to maintain his phenomenal reputation on stage. So when we say artists live on the fringes and live their fullest life, even though that wasn't exactly the era I'm referring to, he certainly lived up to it.
If I
That
could,
mildly inappropriate story.
Well, on that note,
if I could just toss in very tactfully one of the Caruso stories along that line, I will be very tactful. He was, as you said, very fond of the ladies, and he was very fond of pinching them. And one day he went to the New York Zoo, and he pinched a lady while he was in the monkey house. She brought suit against him, and that made the headlines in the New York Times.
I did not know that one, but I will be
Caruso pinches lady in the monkey house.
There you go. Now we're really in the weeds, but I love it. Thank you guys. I'm really enjoying getting to see you guys regularly. And for our new people, welcome. This place should be full of laughter and entertainment. And I hope you've enjoyed this as much as we have.
thank you all so much. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, John. Oh, we've got Jennifer's waving her hands here. I'm trying to unmute you.
Hello, goodbye.
There we go. Oh, oh, is that what you were doing? Oh, thank you all. Thank you all for joining us. And next week is the Daughter of the Regiment. So I hope you can join us next Wednesday. And again, thank you all. It's just such a pleasure just meeting with you each week. We really appreciate it. And hope to see you next week.
See you soon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Adios.
Thank you.